Wanting to explore America in the 1850s, the Chinese set out to encounter life in America. However, the Americans didn't fairly exchange, thus creating the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Chinese Exclusion Act, signed in 1882 by President Chester A. Arthur, prevented Chinese laborers from immigrating to America. However, the Chinese didn't go down without a fight. The Chinese then revolted by using the judicial system to their victory, and then boycotting until the United States government repealed the acts, giving fair exchange between China and the U.S. In the early 1850s, Chinese workers immigrated to the United States for labor and industry jobs, including gold mines, to agricultural and factory jobs, especially in the garment division. However, while working in the gold mines, the Chinese then were kicked out to urban places like San Francisco, where they worked in some of the most difficult and hardest jobs. However, success in these jobs led to venturing to be an entrepreneur. Moreover, as the laborers increase, their powers increase, which can give them more power to revolt. Therefore, legislature aimed to limit Chinese immigrants. Most immigrants came to the U.S. to send back money to China. However, they also had to cover their traveling expenses by sending more money back to China, leaving them with little balance left. Non-Chinese laborers required higher pay because they had to support their family. Because they are also American, they have better social class, and they can demand better wages. However, the Chinese on their own gathered in their own communities. Tales soon began that Chinese men gathered to smoke opium, gamble, and visit prostitutes. Advocates of the anti-Chinese legislation argued that admitting Chinese to the U.S. lowered the cultural and moral standards of American society. Others used more racist arguments by expressing concern about the integrity of American racial composition. Senator John F. Miller of California said that Chinese are machine-like, of obtuse nerve, but little affected by heat or cold, wiry, sinewy, with muscles of iron. Therefore, the Chinese population had to be controlled. From 1850 to 1870, California government passed a series of measures at Chinese residents, such as requiring special licenses for Chinese businesses or prevention of naturalization. However, this was vetoed by the government because it violated the 1868 Burlingame Seward Treaty with China. In 1879, Congress sought to limit immigration of Chinese up to the point of 15 Chinese per vessel. However, it was vetoed by Rutherford B. Hayes because it violated agreements with China. However, most Republicans were committed to a platform of free immigration. In 1880, the Hayes administration appointed James B. Angell to negotiate a new treaty with China. This agreed treaty, called the Angell Treaty, allowed the U.S. to restrict, but not completely prohibit, immigration from China. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was signed by President Chester A. Arthur. It prohibited immigration of, quote, skilled and unskilled laborers, end quote. It also required all Chinese to carry a certificate identifying his or her role. In 1888, the Scott Act was passed, making re-entry from a visit to China impossible. In 1892, the Chinese Exclusion Act was renewed in the form of the Geary Act, which additionally made all Chinese get a certificate of residence or face deportation. In 1902, the act was renewed, extending the prohibition territories to the Philippines and Hawaii, which had Asian inhabitants. In 1904, the act was then made permanent. With all of these acts going on, immigrant levels dropped. According to the U.S. Census, in 1880, there was a total of 105,465 Chinese immigrants. In 1900, there was a total of 89,863 immigrants. In 1920, there was a total of 61 and 639 immigrants. In 1910, Angel Island Immigration Station was established. In there, a Chinese could be detained for weeks to even years before being granted or denied entry. However, the Chinese didn't give up without a fight. They learned how to use the judicial system. They brought up their complaints about these acts being unconstitutional and then won many cases. However, some immigrants avoided all laws entirely. They immigrated illegally. Some came across the borders of Canada or Mexico. Others migrated into America using false identities. Some used the paper son method, where the immigrant bought papers which were names of fictional characters which were supposedly sons of fictional immigrants. Also, in 1905, China set up an anti-American boycott, where China didn't use American products. Theodore Roosevelt recognized this as a sign of retaliation for China not getting equal rights, and then called the Chinese government to call this boycott off. However, America then cut off the access to courts for Chinese and handed over the permissions to the Bureau of Immigration. They did this because the Americans thought that the courts were being too nice to the Chinese and letting them win these cases. The act finally ended in 1943, where the Chinese Exclusion Acts and the acts under the terms of it were repealed with the Magnusson Act. This act permitted a quota of 105 immigrants from China annually. However, the Immigration Act of 1965 then was passed. It stated, quote, effective on July 1st, 1968, a limit of 170,000 immigrants from outside the Western Hemisphere can enter the U.S., with a maximum of 20,000 for one country. Skill and need for political asylum determines admission, end quote. However, the Immigration Act of 1990 provides a flexible cap on employment-based, family-based, and diversity immigrant visas. The Act also states that visas for any single foreign state in these categories may not exceed 7% of the total available. By creating these immigration treaties, the U.S. then cleared up the way for future immigration. However, despite these treaties and acts, by introducing the Chinese Exclusion Act, the U.S. damaged a lot of its relation with China, leaving a small balance between them.